So
I
it's-
mean,
yeah.
just to.
To make sure you're. Don't worry. I'll be skipping through quite a few. Not too many slides at a
That
time.
is good. Okay, I'll wait some. It's coming. Hello, welcome back, everyone. So let's continue. Our next speaker is Dr. Oh, yes. Our next speaker is Dr. Adeyemi, Associate Director, CMC Regulatory Affairs at ProPharma Group. He possesses 14 years industrial experience as an immunological expert in vitro medical devices, biologics with a strong focus on cell and gene therapies. Yemi holds both an MPhil from the University of Sheffield and a PhD from the University College London. Now let me welcome Dr. Yemi with the presentation title Regulatory Considerations for CGT Products with the MHRA, UK and EU national competent authorities. I believe it will be a very interesting talk, so please.
Okay. Thank you very much for the organisers inviting me. So I've got quite a lot of slides, so I'm going to zoom through this pretty quickly, and hopefully you'll have questions after. So the EU ATMP regulation is made up of quite a few directives. So the first directive obviously is the Medicines Product for Human Use in 2001, which actually classified cell and gene therapy products. You then had the EU Blood Directive, which basically looked at transplantations and transfusions using cells and blood products which have been minimally manipulated and for homologous use, and that's really important for the ATMP classification. You then have the Cells and Tissues Directive, which looks at donor regulations, so for allergenic materials, so donor testing, viral testing, the kind of regulations around storage, procurement, and ethical uses of allergenic material. And then you have, in 2007, the EU ATMP regulation, which looked at classification and the roles around ATMP regulation. So, EU regulation, as I said, of 2007, basically it's classification of advanced therapy medicinal products, looks at GMP manufacture, subject to central marketing authorization. That means it is done by the EMA rather than on a national level. And they set up a Committee of Advanced Therapies, or CAT, which specializes in being the experts in looking at advanced therapies and cell and gene therapy products. So there's several guidelines and kind of reflection papers that look at the ATMP regulations, give you kind of guidance. So there's the general ones, which basically look at the non-clinical, clinical, and quality aspects of your product. Then you've got the development, so the kind of modifications you would do for your product. And there's a look at basically the non-clinical package that you would require to kind of look at regulators or approach regulators when you're trying to start a clinical trial. There are some safety guidelines which look at things like environmental risk assessments, or GMOs, which could be really important for you when you try to start a clinical trial in Europe. And there are things like germline transmission. So for particular type of ATMPs, like AAV, especially in vivo, you're going to look at the situation of the safety aspects for things like your kind of reproductive organs, gametes, and making sure that it doesn't actually pass on to your progeny. And there's two specific guidelines, one for gene-modified cells, like CAR-Ts, modified TCRs, and for AAV. So what kind of initial clinical package do you need, non-clinical package and CMC package would you need to kind of go to see a regulator and start a trial? So for small molecules and biologics, you have your pharmacological studies, which look at the therapeutic action and the mode of action of your treatment, and it actually looks at secondary pharmacology. You have your toxicity studies, which are really important, not only the exploratory, but your pivotal studies, which will actually justify the reasons why you think it should be safe to do this trials in humans, and that's under GLP. And then you've got things which look at absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination of your drug product. With ATMPs, it's not the case, because with ATMPs, like for CAR-Ts or TCR-modified TCRs, it's a living medicine. It will expand, they will proliferate, they will engraft. Also, with AAVs or any other kind of viral vector, your transgene will be expressed for long term, hopefully, to make sure it has a therapeutic effect. So therefore, these don't count. You're really looking at distribution and persistence. So I'm going to run through these safety concerns. There's quite a few of them, and they'll be touched. But essentially, depending on your product, for lentivirus, for like ex vivo gene modification, you're looking at the integration for lentivirus and retrovirus. AAV is transient, but you're looking at tropisms because it's going to look at what kind of tissues it will affect. You've got viral vector and viral distribution, depending on your local and systemic administration. You need on-target but off-target effects, cross-reactivity, you see in CAR-Ts. Germline, as I've spoken about. This is fairly important. So with your viral vector, if it's retro or lenti, you've got to look to make sure it's not replication competent. That's going to be really important. And also the viral copy number, the number of gene copy numbers per cell is going to be really important. Regulators definitely look at that. The transgene that you're using, does that affect have kind of adverse effect or inappropriate effects? Insertional mutagenesis. So if you're using a kind of an integrating vector, you're going to try to see whether it's not hitting any oncogenic sites. So you basically do things like in silico assessment, computer, or whole genome sequencing. If you're using pluripotent cells, tumorigenicity, in vivo models, take to 9 to 12 months to check, or in vitro systems. So I like the fact that you look at things like if you're introducing a suicide switch, which was mentioned earlier, you have basically got to check for that to see if it works. Remidusib and rituximab are two examples of a small molecule and a biologics that has been used in systems that we've seen. Environmental GMO assessments, which are really important. Look at viral shedding. So you can do your GMO assessment EU, and actually if you're going to Japan, it's LMO. And with the new kind of technologies, or not so much technology anymore, the gene editing with CRISPR-Cas9, zinc finger, talons, you want to look for where your double break cuts are going to be available, or where it's done, on-off targets again. Look at translocation for the gene rearrangement, so you've got to look at models for that. And in certain cases, the nucleases are immunogenic, so classified for like CRISPR-Cas9, you have to assess for that too. So all in all, for you to approach the regulators, you need the timing of your non-clinical study is going to be really important in relation to your clinical study. The choice of animal models or species you're using, or disease models are going to be really important to justify your dose. Have to have basically a good rationale for why you're doing this and how it looks in the clinical situation. And it's obviously the timing of your interaction with the regulator is going to be very important when you decide. So for your CMC, something called the quality target product profile. And what that is a summary of characteristics of the final drug product which incorporates desired attributes for the specific indication and condition for a particular patient population. And this actually underpins all your CMC package and all the associated activities behind it. It looks at basically the critical quality attributes of your product, which is then in turn to identify the process parameters of your manufacturing, which controls it. And in actual fact, the CPP will actually turn the design space, which will then be later to use to tell to the regulators that you have good control, and that's important for your development later on, and also for its approval, for validation. And finally, the QTPP actually could influence your final release specification for your final drug product or your drug substance. These are examples, so you're looking at things like target population, proposed drug substance, drug product, mechanism of action, dose form and design, route of administration, raw materials and starting materials you're going to use, strength of potency, the container closure, if it's a vial or a bag, and the stability, even in-use stability of how it's going to be handled in the clinic. For the CMC package, you don't have to be very extensive, but you need to have certain things in line for you to go to the regulator. So it's going to be manufacturing process, critical steps, intermediates, impurities, if they have one, how do you control them, specifications, and the analytical procedures to measure those specifications. You've got the batches, if you're having them. For your drug product, it's going to be fairly important for the components of drug product, your excipients, the kind of balance between your active substance and your excipients. Obviously, you've got specification analytics. The batch analysis is going to be important in this case because what you're going to be looking at is to show what the use of your batch is for your GLP toxic studies and your GMP clinical studies. So you have to note that. Container closure system you're using and how that's compliant, and stability. You have to have stability data because in such case you need at least 6 months stability data to start a clinical trial, and you have to have justification if you don't have that. So, what's the regulatory roadmap in the EU for the NTPs? So, we've got to talk about Brexit. So, in 2021, the UK left the EU, but the MHRA expects to duplicate and match the EU procedures in timetable with regard to scientific advice, at least for the time being. And in our experience, that is happening. And in some cases, also with other procedures as well. So, these are the regulatory interactions that you would do if you're good for the lifestyle of your product. I've put the FDA in for the US because it's really important. The FDA basically control and look after, regulate all the things, early discussions, start approval before you start clinical trials, the clinical trials itself, market authorization for your BLA. Also look at your pediatric plans if it's going to be targeting pediatric patients, rare diseases for orphan designation. In the EU, it's different. What happens is the EMA does everything apart from the clinical trials, which is done on a national level. So that means the national authorities are the ones that look after the clinical trials, your submissions for your CTAs and what have you. They don't do the market authorization. So when you go for scientific advice for the EMA, you're really looking at your MAA strategy of authorization, how you're going to get registrational. If you go for EU scientific advice, the emphasis is going to be on the clinical trials and what you're required to do for clinical trials. Now, the UK has left the EU, so the MHRA has now adopted quite a lot of the stuff that the EMA are using, or have done, sorry. So they will actually do your market authorization as well. They will basically do the clinical trials. They have their own expedited programs, which I'll talk about later, but and orphan designation PIPs, the ATP classification is basically kind of piggybacking off the EMA. So, ATP classification. Certain things some people will do is try to see if they can classify the product. So this is from 2002, the regulation. So you're trying to classify whether your product is a gene therapy, cell therapy, or tissue engineered product. It's an evaluation done by CAT. There's no charge. It's not obligatory or requirement, and it's not really binding. However, the incentives are quite good. You have early interaction with the EMA, and you have fee reduction for further scientific advice, about 65%. It's a 60-day procedure. You get discussion and maybe a 30-day, and 60-day, you get your result. Now, with orphan designation, if you're targeting a rare disease, you basically have to go through COMP. So basically, it's a community register for orphan medicinal products, and it basically looks at the regulation of 1999. And the orphan status is a designation that you have a condition where the prevalence, not incidence, but prevalence, is no greater than 5 in 10,000 persons in the community at the time of applications made, which is really important. The incentives are good. 10 years market exclusivity once the orphan drug has been authorized. You get protocol assistance for your clinical trials, and you have access to fee reductions with the EMA. Applications are done free of charge, done through IRIS portal, and you have to notice with the EMA especially, there are published submission deadlines you have to look at in the website to make sure you submit. It's a good idea to go to COMP before you submit your ODD application as pre-submission. Again, it's go through IRIS. 90-day procedure, 60 days, COMP will give you a list of questions. You may have an opportunity to meet them, to discuss these questions, and the final result is at 90 days. This big one. Let me create this quickly. So, expedited programs. So expedited programs are very desirable for the kind of producers and the manufacturers and developers of treatments. So the main one is priority medicine for the EMA. The criteria is that it's a major therapeutic advantage over existing treatments or offers benefit for patients without treatment options. Time of application is roughly at phase 1, phase 2 of the clinical trial. The standard is very high. You need to kind of typically show 60 to 70% improvement over existing treatments or the treatment area. Incentives and benefits, you get a rapporteur straight away, and those are the ones who normally eventually will kind of approve your product or at least assess it at market authorization. It's proof from CAT, you get guidance of your development plan, regulatory strategy, scientific advice at key development milestones, so that's for end of phase 1 or end of phase pre-submission. Assessment with health assessment bodies, which is really important because obviously reimbursement, and potential for accelerated assessment. MHRA for the UK have their own expedited program, which is the Innovative Licensing Assessment Access Pathway. It's for life-threatening and debilitating conditions. Has a UK emphasis on the public priorities for that. Innovative medicine has to be, but it doesn't have to be an ATMP. It is different because it's on non-clinical data. You don't need to have, they are targeting non-clinical data, and you apply for an innovative passport. It's not suitable for products in the late stage of development and close to MAA. But once you've got this innovation passport, it guarantees specialized toolkit, development plan, and stakeholders with like NICE and NHS is really important for later stages. Scientific advice. You have the central scientific advice with the EMA, and then you have these advices for all the different national authorities or member states. I'll go through this really quickly. So with central advice with EMA, it's a 90-day procedure. Have a validation situation where you submit your briefing package with your letter of intent, and then it's through the IRIS portal, and then they'll validate to see whether the package is correct. You then have a date submitted, and then you submit your briefing package based on the published times again. At day 30, CAT will decide whether you can do a meeting or not, or whether it's worth it. If you do have a meeting, it's at 60 days, it's adopted at 70 days, and the onus is actually on the applicant to provide the minutes. Now, if you go across to Europe, there's a range of different kind of procedures. So, for example, in France, the time for duration requests are different. So it's really interesting that NSM basically asks for applications to be set on 2 set days per month, the third Tuesday and Thursday. Briefing package, details of meetings is all dictated to by NSM, and it's a case-by-case basis. Whereas with PI, it's very regimental in the sense that you have the meeting approved, you send it by email. They should provide you between 8 to 12 weeks, but really we're looking at 6 months currently because they're very popular. You submit the briefing package. There's no additional actions procedure-wise. You have an agreed date. You have your meeting. The applicant sends their meeting minutes 2 to 3 weeks before the meeting, and PI will then respond with their final responses. And this is the same case for FAM-HP for Belgium and MHRA. With FAM-HP and MHRA, there is a situation where you actually can present slides. That has to be presented a couple of, maybe like 2 weeks before or kind of 3 or 4 days before the meeting, and then you actually conduct the meeting with the presentation. Pediatric plans, very important. So a pediatric plan is basically looking at the health of pediatric patients by making sure that they are available for the children in the EU, so they're not ignored. So the medicines should be of high quality, correctly authorized, and ethically researched. However, they should not delay the market authorization in adults or subject children to unnecessary clinical trials. But what you need to note is that no medicinal product can be approved for market authorization in EU without the establishment of what's called a pediatric investigational plan. So this is overseen by the Pediatric Committee, PEDCO. Oh, 1 minute, oh good. And basically it's in cooperation with other agencies. I won't go into that, but that's going to be fairly important because you look at waivers, you have to look at waivers and deferrals to check to see whether you can excise particular populations for that. Let me go for clinical trials. Clinical trials at the moment, there is a new clinical trial regulation which is coming in at the end of this year, which is looking at trying to harmonise the clinical trials across the board of the authorities in the EU. So the UK, Germany and France, if we can use examples, clinical trial time frames is normally expected to be about 125 days or 90 days depending, with clock stops. These are the really experienced times that we're experiencing. And the clock stops are basically there for the agency to look at your application and present questions, and you then effectively answer them. So it can take, you have to take into consideration that it's quite long. I'll just do one more thing. GMOs. These are really, really important. You're doing an environmental assessment of your product. And that, you have to apply for that and submit that with your CTA at the time. However, the timelines are very different, and it's also how it's administered is different depending on the agency. So for Germany, PI actually do both the CTA and the GMO assessment. They look to see whether it is submitted at the same time, yes, what have you. Others have different agencies, maybe more than one, depending on what's called the contained use or deliberate release. Deliberate release is when you actually, the first organization is that you use your manufacturing of your product and you're releasing the genetic material into the environment. You have to look at these risks of that. And contained use is that you have shown risks that you're containing that. And France and the UK, you'd submit your CTA. It's independent of your GMO assessment, and it's not in parallel. But the most important thing is that you have to consider the timelines expected for this. And the Netherlands are renowned to be very administrative heavy for your applications. And I think I'll leave it for that. Sorry. Thank you very much.